Hi friends, this is Josh from the Narrate team. This past weekend was our annual Vision Weekend. Adam asked the question, are we who we set out to be?
Hey, good morning. It's great to be with you. For those of you who are guests visiting maybe for the first time, this is a pretty strategic weekend because it's something we do once a year where we talk pretty openly and honestly about ourselves. It wouldn't be healthy if we talked about ourselves all the time, but it also wouldn't be healthy if we never talked about ourselves. And so we call it Vision Weekend because our whole calendar starts in September, wraps around through August. So financially, calendar-wise, and our own psyche, everything kind of starts now because this is week one of what would be our 8th year together. But actually, it's not week one, it's week 2, because week 1 we shut down because of Labor Day, and there's all kinds of strategic reasons for that with our volunteers and our staff, and we also like to sabotage our budget first week of the fiscal year. It just makes good sense to do that, and kidding, but it's functionally true. Which means week 1 was last week, so I hope you had a good Sunday last Sunday and had some fun. My family and I, we decided to road trip to I don't know how else to say this other than to say, like the skanky hot springs in White Sulphur Springs. So there's some hot springs there, and we decided that we were going to go up to those hot springs. Maybe you're familiar with them. But we got there, and because it was raining, and we thought, let's sit in the hot springs while it's raining outside, and that'd be kind of fun. And we got there, and it turns out every elk hunter in the valley had the same idea. And so we got to the parking lot. There literally was not a parking spot to be had. And so we did this kind of, you just do the loop to confirm there's not a parking spot. And we were driving around the pool. And I don't know if you're familiar, but you can't see in the pool. But we came around this one side, and I'm guessing it's an emergency exit. There's a gate, and some high school kids were running amok with the ice machine and getting barked at for that. And so they left the gate open, and we could see in there, and you could see into the pool, which is about 10 by 10 feet. It's probably a little bigger than that. But theoretically, there was room for another person, but you would needed a crane to get into that spot. I mean, there's like you need like that claw at Perkins, like to just lift you and put you in, and there's no way all 7 of us were going to get spots next to each other. But invariably, you would have been touching 3 or 4 people. They just wouldn't have been the people that you were with. It was just that tight. So we decided, hey, there's a really neat brewery in town. Let's go hit that for a little while, gain the courage to go back to the hot springs. We got back, and it was largely depleted. Got there and did the whole hot springs thing. It's not even really my style. I don't even like water, but it was kind of fun. But there's good news here, and this is why I'm telling you this story. Because if you, on a whim, just kind of spontaneously decide you want to go to the hot springs in White Sulphur, the great news is you don't have to plan ahead because they rent swimming suits. It's only $1. And ladies, they'll rent one to you too. Right? So we knew they rented them to dudes, and so we were standing there. I didn't know they rented them to women. We're standing in there. I'm waiting for the rest of our crew to get out of the 4x4 locker room where you also touch people, but that's anyway. Kidding. And so we're standing there waiting, and this middle-aged couple came walking in, and the lady walks up to the counter, and she's like, we would like to go swimming, and we need 2 swimming suits. And the lady behind the counter has been chewing on razor blades for days. Like, there was not much hospitality. She'd been dealing with the high school students, running amok with the ice machine, and she said, well, what size is he? And she said, medium, and she hands him a medium swimsuit. And then the lady behind the counter says, well, what size are you? And she goes, poor lady, right? She goes, like 12, maybe 14? And the lady goes, small, medium, or large? And so the lady goes, large. And she grabs the swimming suit and she holds it up in front of her. And it had like that little like midriff like thing that hang, like the little sash thing. She holds it up and the lady's like, medium. It was so terrible and awesome all at the exact same time. I love living in Montana. So Vision Weekend for us, you guys, in all seriousness, it's an audit. It's an opportunity for us to go, are we who we set out to be? Are we existing in the way that we set out to exist? I think for those of you who are vested of this place in your time and your resource, it's an audit to go, are we doing what we said we would do? Is this still the best investment of my time and resource? And Vision Weekend is really about us going like, here's where we're at and here's where we're headed. In fact, I was having lunch with a new friend, John, recently, and he shared with me a fable that as he told the thing, it was both horrifying and motivating at the same time, and I think captures why we do Vision Weekend. Now, this fable was set in the age of kings and queens and castles and moats and visionary or imaginary dragons and knights and round tables and, people who eat turkey legs from the bone. It was kind of that medieval time. And the hero of his fable was a knight who wears white. And of course, the purpose of the knight who wears white is to kill the knight who wears black and deal with the threats. Because it's pretty fundamental, right? Like the raiders wear black, everybody else wears white, right? That's for you, Eric. And the Panthers also, it turns out, wear black. So just so we're clear. So his job is just to kind of deal with the periphery and make sure that, I think the guy in black might get us this year, for those of us Bronco fans, but that's a different story. Anyway, to make sure that they deal with that. So our hero was out and about, and he was kind of on the edges, and he saw off in the far distance another knight, and he squinted and kind of leaned in, and he determined, strangely enough, it was another knight wearing white. And so he's like, oh, this is occasion for a celebration, because we don't often get to see each other out in the field. And he turned his horse and pointed it towards him and kind of started heading in his direction. And as he did so, he could see the knight wearing white doing the same thing, and they're heading towards each other. And he was kind of imagining, who is it? I wonder what kind of interactions we'd have, because of course, you don't know who that is underneath all that armor. And as they're going about kind of getting closer and closer to each other, he was getting more and more excited about what was happening. And then he realized that the other knight wasn't just kind of gingerly bringing his horse in his direction, but his horse was at a sprint. And in fact, at about 200 yards, he realized that the other knight maybe wasn't a friend at all, but maybe a foe, and he confirmed that when he watched the other knight lower his joust and was coming at him. Now, again, fight or flight kicks in. You don't have time to analyze this. Our hero, the man wearing white, he puts down his joust, and I don't even know how this works, but they go back and forth, and it's an epic battle, nobody gaining an upper hand. And finally, on a pass that felt like 3 hours in, the other knight, he almost got our hero's horse. His horse kind of dodged at the last second, causing the joust to go up, and it caught the hero right in the gut, apparently some kind of a chink in the armor, if you will. And our hero, he immediately knew what was happening. He could feel his armor filling with blood. He knew this was the end. He felt his hands let go of the reins of his horse. And as he fell off of his horse and as he was falling to the ground, he caught a reflection of himself in the other knight's shield. And it was then he realized he was actually, our hero, a black knight. And as he laid on the ground, knowing that he was bleeding to death, all he could do was lay there and wonder, when did that happen? Like, unbeknownst to me, when did I transition from being the hero to the villain? When I heard that story, for me, it was gripping and horrifying and motivating, because, guys, you don't need me to tell you that no person and no group of people is more susceptible to living out that story than a group of people who commission themselves to serve, follow, and represent God. Far too often, we start with these great, ambitious, pure motivations. And listen, the reason why so many of you are reluctant even to be here this morning, and so many of our friends would never be caught here, is because far too often the hero becomes the villain, and we've crossed that line and we don't even realize it. On a personal level, on a corporate leadership level, to me, Vision Weekend, to be honest with you, it's not even my favorite one to prepare for, but I think it's this important audit to make sure that all the gather, scatter stuff is more than rhetoric, that we're actually doing it. And for you, it's a chance to go, is 6:30 in the morning still the best use of your time? Is that what could be a cabin payment, a car payment, private school for your kids? Is that worth that investment of resource? Now, there's lots of things that I wish we had time to talk about, be it students and kids, the trip to Ecuador that happened. There's myriad things out there, the $22,000 that we raised for Trails with Helen Else for Trails. But part of the challenge of this weekend is we don't have that kind of time. And so I just want to talk about three things, kind of put them before you as you conduct your own audit. The first one deals with something we did talk about last Vision Weekend. You'll remember that that was the first time that we really began to speak publicly about, for us, what is this very confounding problem, and that is, what does it look like to serve under-resourced people in a welfare state? Now, that's a question that I don't have a clean answer to. It's one we've wrestled with a lot, because to me, what's frustrating is when James says pure religion is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, if we're being honest, their world's not our world. People died, they starved to death. They didn't have things if physical needs weren't met in their day. That's not our day. And there's a whole other conversation about when our good is actually doing good. And so as a church, there's this very frustrating conversation of what does it look like to serve under-resourced people in this state of affairs? That's not a political comment, it's just an is comment. And so the experiment that we brought to the table last Vision Weekend was, what if we relied upon our classroom teachers to help us identify under-resourced people, especially their kids? And what if we created this kind of discretionary fund and we just said to our teachers, we would love to do for one what we wish we could do for everyone. If you just keep your eyes peeled for needs as you see them show up in your classroom, we would love to be a part of that. Well, to that end, I invite you to turn your attention to the screen.
My name is Jessica Fisher. I am a special education teacher at Helena Middle School, and I work with kids with social and emotional needs. My coworker, Lori Cope, and I really spend a lot of time trying to be intentional with relationships, as does the entire staff here, but we were talking this year about how can we further make a difference? How can we further connect with our at-risk kids and just give them an opportunity to come in and just have positive interactions with adults? I was actually laying in bed one night, not sleeping, kind of stressing about that, and just had this idea to do a breakfast club. Was originally thinking like cereal, kind of basic, really easy, but just kind of a time to connect and be relational with kids. And so I woke up the next morning and I immediately called my coworker Lori and just said, hey, this is my idea. You have a kitchen. Is this something you're on board with? And she was like, yeah, let's do it. Admin is usually a little hesitant with saying yes to my big ideas, but he said, if you can get a way to pay for breakfast, I'm totally on board. You can start whenever you have it. So I immediately went and emailed Adam and Sarah at Narrate and just said, hey, I don't really know what this is going to look like yet, but this is an idea I have, and I think it would make a really big difference. And got a text back with Adam within minutes saying, hey, I want to talk to you about this. I'm really excited. They had met as a church council the night before and had talked about what they could do to make a difference with kids in the community. And so just really cool how God just brought that to my heart and brought it to Narrate's heart. And a week later, I had $250 for Costco from people at Narrate to buy food. The first one we did was in November. We kind of targeted kids that first week and looked at, okay, what are like 20, 25 kids in the building who really, we feel like need more from us, who need that connection. And so we sent out invitations. Several of them came to me, what is this? This is weird, Miss Fisher, what is this? And so we just told them, we just want to eat with you and connect with you. And I would say probably like 10 to 12 came that first week. They were kind of uncomfortable at first and kind of nervous, but seeing their friends around and just loved having the hot breakfast. The hot breakfast was a big deal for them. And at the end of the breakfast, we said, hey, we'll see you next week. And they were all really excited and surprised that we were going to do it every week. And we just told them, invite your friends. We just made a decision early on that we never wanted to say, no, you can't come. We did it every week for the rest of the year. And my parents came every week and cooked it. They have worked with at-risk kids their whole career too, and so they really wanted us to be able to have the time to talk to kids. And we had one girl that came at 7 o'clock every week just to talk to us, and other kids who came in on more than one occasion and said, I wasn't going to come to school today, Miss Fisher, but I remembered it was breakfast. And one kid who for 2.5 years had never looked me in the eyes, had never said hi to me, now would stop and talk to me in the hallway. So just those helping kids to feel valued and helping kids to feel like they mean something to somebody. These are our kids that are, hungry. They go home and they don't know if they have a meal. They have parents who are addicts. They live in group homes. They live with an aunt or an uncle. We had one kid who was living at a hotel with his uncle for the last month of school and was walking himself to school to be at the breakfast. So people from Narrate have really helped with that, both with a gift card, but also like my parents coming every week to cook. Also had Cielo. They cooked Mexican tacos for the whole group. Another couple from church brought breakfast the day before Christmas and brought stockings for all the kids filled with snacks. So just little things, but they make a huge difference for kids. So I wanted to say thank you to Narrate and Adam and the staff there for coming alongside of us and supporting this so that we can keep this going for the next year, and just thank you for giving us this opportunity to scatter.
Pretty fun, huh? So that breakfast is now a line item in your budget, and we've just kind of expanded the school discretionary thing, and we're just going to kind of continue to experiment with that and see where it goes. Is it a world-changing thing? No, we've never been of the mind that we wanted to change the world. We've always been of the mind of, hey, let's do for one or a couple what we wish we could do for everyone. Another question that came up last week, moving kind of quickly, or last year, was, hey, what if we could serve more people on Christmas Eve? Now, you may or may not have been around to know that in 2014 on Christmas Eve, we had to go to tickets because we recognized there was going to be a greater demand than we had seats, and it went as well as it could, but we still know of people who didn't attend because their assumption was because it was sold out, and it was. Here's a graph that just kind of shows us our history of attendance on Christmas Eve heading into last year. So we had this trend, and we were going like, wow, wait a minute, maybe we can serve a lot of people on Christmas Eve. And so last Vision Weekend, I came to you and said, like, hey, we want to do Christmas Eve at the Civic Center, but here's the catch. Like our doing that is going to require 100+ people to volunteer on a day of the year that nobody wants to volunteer, right? Like you want to volunteer on February 21st when it's 20 below outside and the football season's over. Not on Christmas Eve when your parents are in town and everyone's waiting for you to start dinner. And so we said, so here's the deal. Like here's what would have to happen is we would need 100 of you to sign up and go, yeah, I'll help usher and greet and set up and tear down and lead the nursery for Narrate kids and all those different factors. And in fact, we left Vision Weekend last year with about 70% of our needed volunteers having already committed. We did fortune cookies, lots of them. Here's the result. I just want to show you a few graphs for those of you who are numbers junkies. So you can see what our attendance did there. And you guys, it's not about attendance, but it is about this conviction that maybe Christmas Eve can help us cause people to rethink Jesus, the Jesus that they long ago rejected. Maybe we can just honor people by giving them this classy, excellent experience to bring their family to. Now, lest you conclude like, oh, yeah, so that was great, a flash in the pan, way to go, a good event. This is the part that I don't think any of us could have seen coming. Let me show you a couple more numbers. So this is growth, percentage of growth over the previous year up until Christmas Eve. So what you can see is last year in the fall, we had our first ever experience of actually not growing. I think we were up like 3% as we came into Christmas Eve. This was very foreign to our experience. Now let me show you growth after Christmas Eve. So what you can see there is we didn't disengage people on Christmas Eve. Something happened. In fact, we closed the year having grown by just shy of 13% once again in our Sunday gatherings. Now, there's another fun one, especially for those of you who are owners, because there's another factor in this being a church together, and it's the whole financial piece. Let me show you another slide. This, again, is percentage of growth last year compared to the previous year by month through Christmas Eve in this case. So what you can see is not only were we not growing financially, we actually weren't even keeping up with the year before, and that was alarming because actually the year before we had grown by something like 17%, and so the budget, you remember last Vision Weekend, we were like, guys, we got a $500,000 budget because we got to rent more space for kids, and kids needs more staff, and it takes more money to feed coffee. I mean, there's like, I don't know what it is, like 40 gallons of coffee we brewed this morning for you all bunch of addicts. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen here, and as we were coming into Christmas Eve, we were not only not keeping up with our growth projections, we were going like, this is not good. I mean, there was no panic, but nonetheless, that was the case. Look at giving again after Christmas Eve. So there again, what you see there is if you have a small business and you're trying to grow it, you should have a Christmas Eve service. I'm just kidding. The reality of this, what this tells me is people were not just engaging, but engaging on a deep level. Like to the point that they were buying into what we've said we wanted to be about, to the point where they're giving up car payments and cabin payments and all other kinds of things in order to go like, wait a minute, this is how Jesus would have me prioritize my stuff. In fact, look at the year as a whole. We can just show you quickly, because again, this is Vision Weekend and part of what it's about. Our giving last year was $460. So I already told you our projection was $500,000. We fell 40 short of that. But the staff worked really, really hard. And we have this genius named Doris who's leading our books. And she helped us kind of go like, wait a minute, here's how we think we can do this. And we worked hard because we prioritize staying in the black. It's always been a priority. We think a church should run their finances the way we all should run our own. And so we work hard to do that. The honest confession is we don't have that $40,000 buffer this year. It's another $500,000 budget, and to be honest with you, there's a lot riding on the fact that we're going to continue to grow and build our generosity muscle. But for those of you who are part of that, thank you. Now, all of that leads to another question, and it's the most common question I receive. It's also one of the sources of the greatest healthy arguments amongst the staff, and that is, haven't we outgrown the Grand Street Theater already? Now, I get cynical because I've been being asked this question since like year 3. But the reality is, look around. It would be easier right now to count empty seats than it would filled seats. All conventional wisdom says that when a place is 80% full, it's full and it won't grow anymore and you're not going to engage anybody else. We've had some experts say to us, like, this place, it's probably not 80, it's probably 60 or 70, and we've had that dynamic for a long time. And yet there's a catch. The catch is, and again, this isn't like a moral absolute for everybody, but our deep abiding conviction from day one has been there is good strategic reason to be portable. First of all, because we think it's easier to attend and check things out and rethink Jesus and church and their role in your life when you're not going to the First Baptist Church of Narrate. That's not a shot against the Baptist Church. It's just like we think it's more approachable when it's public space. I would challenge many of you. How many of you would have never come for the first time if you were going to the church? I was just talking to a friend this week, and she kind of said that, and I said, yeah, because you assume that if they're letting us meet there, we're not butchering chickens on the stage, right? And she's like, yeah, like how weird can it get when it's in public space? That's a big piece of it. Another big piece of it is we don't want to be a church where 6 people work really hard to make it happen for the rest of us. It's intentional and strategic. We talked about this in Calling All Owners to go like, wait a minute, I love that for us to pull this off and you to have your experience, it required somebody who had to work Friday and work tomorrow, 2, in fact, to get here at 6:30 to brew all the coffee. And that's just an example. We've said that's what we want to be. And the other factor is we've always said that to be portable would allow us to take our rent and invest it into public space. And if we mean scattering, let's scatter with even our facility use. I'm proud of the fact that we paid the Grant Street about $24,000 in rent last year. Now, that's not free, but it's real money, and Cal will be the first one to say that helps them accomplish their goals. I love that. We've approached lots of different organizations, and the Grand Street, like, they have to balance budgets, and they go, wow, this is mutually beneficial. Love that. The facility improvements we've been a part of. Those are all things that are because we're portable, but there's still this catch. And the catch is, like, there's no seats. So some weird things happened last year. First of all, we had a council meeting where we talked about this, and we're constantly exhausting options and considering things, and just very few of them translate. We went even to the school district and went like, we would love to rent and improve some space, and they're just not interested. And so we just kind of continue to do our due diligence and at the same time hope and pray that God is keeping us in mind. What the council meeting, what was brought up was that the Ming Opera House, or what you may know as the Shriners Temple, was up for sale. It was listed. It was listed at like $400,000. It was on Jackson Street. You may not be familiar with it. It's a 20,000 plus square foot space with this incredible theater in the middle of it that has historic significance. Mark Twain spoke from the stage there. I mean, it's this crazy building that's kind of been under lock and key for a long time, largely because the boiler's from 1880 and there's no fire escape. I mean, there's some major code issues. In fact, at one point, we went through this fire escape out of the auditorium, and you're just on the second floor of the building roof. Like, well, I don't know what you do now, but you're out of the building. You just got to jump off the roof, I guess. So there's some major issues going on. So they said, well, what if there's an investor who's interested in that space, and if they knew that we wanted to rent from them, that would kind of tip the business plan over. And we were like, well, I was like, that's a good idea. So I called my friend Deb the next day, who was a real estate agent, and she kind of went to work figuring out if there were any investors who asked, and she identified a couple, and I even knew one of them personally, and we kind of had those conversations, and it turns out they weren't interested anymore. And so then we said, well, we might as well look at the space. So we've lined up this deal to go look at the space, and as we're standing in the parking lot, their realtor, kind of off the record, so this is off the record, okay? He said they'd probably just give you the space if you just give them the opportunity to continue to meet their own needs with it for a few years. So now I'm like, seriously, Lord, you're killing me here. Like I've always said, we don't want a building, but if you give us one, we'll have to deal with that. And so now we're talking about being given this building. We go inside, and it's crazy, it's old, it's awesome, it's full of asbestos. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on. We walked into the main theater, and like the staff's jaw hit the floor. I mean, it is opulent. It fits the culture of this place. And we started to go, okay, Lord, so maybe what's going on here is we get to steward this resource for our community and provide this space, and we all know that it could be of benefit, and so maybe that's what we need to do here. And so we just kind of kept stepping through doors. We pulled in our friends from SAM Architects, Clint, who's a part of this place, who's one of the principals there, and just said, hey, could you guys come help us analyze this space? And they came in and they looked at it and they're like, this is awesome. By the way, the boiler's from 1880. Like, so what they ultimately came together with was a report saying it would cost about $25,000 for them to put together a report to even tell us how much asbestos was in this place. And so then we're left staring at this like $25,000 thing. And it wasn't that we don't have that the council's worked hard to have emergency reserves for things like that, especially because we don't have assets like buildings and land. But nonetheless, we were like, okay, so suddenly it's not just like, just keep stepping forward. Well, then there was a few things that happened. The first one, it was a Friday. It was exactly a week out from Ailes. We were in the midst of making this decision. My phone rang. I missed it. It was at lunch. I was walking back to the office when I saw that I missed a call from one of my son's retired teachers. And I thought, that's weird, so I called her back. Don't usually call you back, but I called this person back. That's a joke. You don't call me back either, so we're even, right? So I called her back, and her husband, who had been battling pancreatic cancer, had passed, and she was asking if we would lead the memorial service. And she was kind of stammering, and more or less finally what she said is like, but Adam, here's the deal. Like, he wasn't a Christ follower, and I'm not interested in pretending like he was. Like, can you work with that? I was like, absolutely. I would much rather work to honor his life than I would like pretend that somebody was something they weren't. I'm just going to trust God with all those details. And so it was, it was probably a 15 or 20 hour deal to kind of, you meet with the family, and there's lots of honoring, kind of grief-filled things that you get to do in this process. Excuse me. The memorial itself was the Thursday before Ales. I pulled into the parking lot at 2 o'clock at the funeral home on North Montana. I was able to pull my friend David Casey in to help with the music. We set some things up. The technical stuff was just okay. The service, I think we did a decent job. The place was packed. In fact, they had to put people in the where they normally eat so they could just listen to the sketchy audio feed. At about 5 o'clock, I was standing next to my Suburban trying to figure out if I could change there into my baseball stuff, and best I could tell, I was safe enough, and so I changed into my baseball stuff and was driving to the baseball game and just thinking about everything that just transpired, and the Ming thing was haunting me because I was trying to be serious about, okay, Lord, I want to pay attention to you, and yet at the same time, and there was all this stuff, and it suddenly occurred to me, wait a minute, if we owned the Ming, first of all, we could serve people a whole lot better. I mean, I love their service, but we could have had you all there making coffee and ushering and greeting, and we could have done an incredible job of putting Jesus on display to a whole bunch of people who maybe haven't been to church in decades. The other thing that occurred to me was it wouldn't have just been 20 hours of my week. It would have been at least 10 hours of every person on staff. That would have been a long day. And that's okay. We're not afraid of hard work. But then I started to think, but wait a minute, and tomorrow's Ales. That, along with Christmas Eve, are the two biggest volunteer days of the year for us. That's a 16-hour day for most of the staff. And then after that, it's the Saturday of Put Ales Away. And not to mention just the staff, but you all volunteering. And then on Saturday, we put Ales away. And Ales is fun. Put Ales Away Day is no fun at all. It's the worst day of the year. And then the next day is Sunday, where we would host 3 gatherings. And we'd all kind of already determined, no, everyone just needs to be in their spot, because this is just going to be one of those weeks where we all got to dig deep. And what occurred to me, and this is biased, but this is what occurred to me is, man, Lord, if we did that, and we had a 4-day span that looked like that very often, the energy would fall out of the bottom of this thing. It would very quickly move from I get to I have to. I'm not sure we could sustain that. Then I talked to my friend Derry, who is on staff at Journey, and you guys, I am not against churches owning buildings. I love that. I have a good friend who that's his job, is to help churches build buildings. It's not an everybody thing, it's an us thing. I talked to my friend Journey, and they built an incredible building in Bozeman, and the community gets to use it. And I was talking to Derry about it, and he said, Adam, we get 1,000 requests a year to use the space. Now, you know where my brain went? That means you say no 2/3 of the time. I don't like saying no. I'm a people pleaser. The other thing that happened was then, in the midst of all of this, Cal, who manages this place, called me, and he was all excited about 326 Fuller, which is right next to the studio space that we use on the kids on Fuller right down here. It's the one in. It used to be the Common Market. And he was all excited about acquiring that space and making that theater space twice as big and doing a lot of kind of really neat things with that. The problem is it would cost a lot of money, and their budget year was coming up, and he wasn't sure if they could afford it, but his bottom line question was, would you guys use it? Because if we used it, then you could get out of 312 and come over to here, and our rent could go up, and maybe we could make this thing happening. And it felt like he had 10 cups of coffee. But what occurred to me was I was quickly reciprocating his energy, going, wait a minute, Cal, helping you improve your public space, that's exciting to me. That I could get excited about. In fact, at one point I called Cal and said, Cal, I want to raise $1 million so that you can own the Ming, and then we'll rent it from you on Sundays. And he did what you just did. He just ha, ha, ha. I see your trap. You go own the Ming. So here's where it leaves us. I think we had our mettle tested. That's personally my conviction. We in the end chose to walk away from the Ming and go, no. You've probably heard guys talk about the keystone habit. Have you heard that phrase? Experts will say that there's a couple habits, good or bad, in your life, and if you can identify the keystone habit, everything else hangs on them, which means if you get them right, you're in good shape, and if you get them wrong, you're in bad shape, literally and figuratively. I'm still of the mindset that our being portable is a keystone habit to what creates the energy and the passion in this place. Now, that creates problems. I mean, look around. The 10 o'clock is full. Quite frankly, we need 20 or 30 people who regularly are part of this to go like, yeah, I'll go to the 8:30, I'll go to the 11:30. Our hospitality team, and they're motivated. It has to move from good to like stinking awesome at the 10 because we don't have any chairs. But at the same time, the abiding conviction is we are not going to sabotage vision and culture in the name of scaling for growth. We love growth. We all have egos. We all think that it's really important that we influence more people. And yet at the same time, we're not going to do it. That doesn't mean that we're not still actively having conversations. We are. There's things out there. The conversation with Cal is very open. And yet, at least for now, it's like, okay, Lord, this is who we are. And so we get to work hard on that. You know, I was having lunch a couple weeks, it's been about a month ago, with these two gals who are part of the Great Conversations event in town. It's this big fundraiser for the school district, and I'd never met either one of them. They'd asked me to lunch. You don't really speak at this event, but you kind of moderate a table, and so, I mean, when they ask you to lunch, you kind of know what they're asking, you know. And I sat down with them, and I had the same experience I have so many times because of you guys. I'm sitting across from community stakeholders who've never been to Narrate and hold us in very high regard, and they're just pummeling me with questions. And really the question is this: I don't get it. I don't want anything to do with church. My friends don't want anything to do with church. I grew up in church, and I think it's archaic and not useful anymore. Churches are closing like crazy, and yet you guys are growing, and there's this positive buzz. Like, what's going on there? And we just kind of talked, and I just told them it's candles. Every Sunday, we just light a lot of candles, and it's like people just show up. It's amazing. So then we were kind of all over the place, and they're like, I was like, so this whole speaking thing, like, what would you want me to speak on? They're like, well, we were thinking maybe you could speak on vulnerability. I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. And they said, well, David Casey said you'd be great to speak on vulnerability. And I was like, well, then you tell David Casey he should speak on vulnerability. Like, no. And then they said, well, and I think this is just like, what does a pastor talk about? How about forgiveness? Why don't you talk about forgiveness? And I was like, I can't talk about forgiveness. Like, I believe in it, but I suck at forgiveness. Like, I can't do that. We're going to do a series starting on Easter called I Suck at Forgiveness, just because it's like, this is hard. And then I said, how about this? And it was one of those, like, for me, aha moments. I said, what if we just asked the question, what's the value of church in a post-Christian culture? It seems to me like that's the question you're asking me is, I don't get it. It's not even a Christian culture anymore. And yet, I said, what if we just asked that question? And they liked it. Turns out I'm speaking on it. And then I went, oh no, I need an answer. Which I don't have, but here's where I'm at. And the language might offend you, but I am going to stand by it. Listen, what if in order for a church to exist in a post-Christian culture, it has to demonstrate, like any business, we're not a business, but you know what I mean, like any business, that it adds value to the lives of the people in the community in which it sits. See, think of it like this. A dentist, they don't get to just exist because, well, like, it's a moral obligation for people to have clean teeth. A coffee shop, a banker, a car salesman, a real estate agent, you name it, like breweries, they don't just get to exist because they have the right to exist. No, what allows those businesses to thrive and exist? They add a value. And if they don't, then guess what? They go out of business. And when someone hands a roofer $20,000 for putting a new roof on their house, what have they just said? They just said, you added value to my life. That's why they're in business. That's why we have toy stores and why we have restaurants. They have an obligation to demonstrate the value that they bring to people's lives. Was it any different for a church? I mean, shouldn't a church go like, wait a minute, we should exist in such a way that if we cease to exist, the most ardent critic of Jesus would be bummed. Why? Because kids aren't having breakfast at HMS on Fridays. Because there's people who could use some help heating their homes and they don't have firewood. Why? Because there's this trail system and we've got to be a part of making it better. Why? Because there's this egg hunt on Mount Helena and I don't want anything to do with church, but I love that I have this festival I can bring my kids to. Why do we work so hard about creating series around here? Because we think it's a way to add value to people's lives. We're going to start one next week called Focus, and it's going to deal with this thing called the iPod and our iPhone and the internet and the fact that we're all so distracted and we're not together and what's it doing to our kids. And we just want to talk about, what do we do with this? And what does the data and the research say? We think that's why a church ought to exist in a community, is because they're adding value to the lives of the people in which that church sits. Kind of like the life of this one person.
Hi, my name is Susanna Nordahl, and this is the story of why I wanted to become baptized. I grew up here in Helena, Montana, and I was raised by a family that did not consistently go to church. I never really learned who Christ was or what it meant to be a Christ follower. When I was in middle school and high school, I did start to develop a little bit of a curiosity, but none of my close friends or immediate family were Christ followers, so I never really felt comfortable reaching out past them. When I left Helena to go to college, I, for whatever reason, didn't pursue my curiosity. I did go to church a couple times with some friends, but I was always left feeling so confused by the language and the message being conveyed. So it wasn't until I moved back to Helena after college where I actually did start going to a different local church here in Helena for about a year, until my best friend invited me to a Christmas Eve service at Narrate. It was that night that I really felt like I had found Christ. Every story that I had ever heard about the birth of Jesus finally made sense to me, and everything just kind of felt perfect in that night. From sitting at Grand Street Theater, where I had hundreds of times before as a kid in theater school, to sitting next to my best friend, to most importantly realizing that I had been broken and that I was in need of a Savior, and that Narrate could be that medium to facilitate that relationship. Since finding Christ, my intentions in life have become much more clear. I use Sundays at Narrate to kind of become centered for the week and figure out where I want my intentions to be. Within my career, Christ has really taught me to think about it as serving my community through my vocation instead of thinking about it as just a job. I also coach college cheerleading, and so Christ has really taught me the importance of listening and being patient with the young women that I serve. So my journey to find and follow Christ could not have been possible without my best friend, Carissa Jones, and my husband, Logan Nordahl. Carissa has been so encouraging of my decision to become baptized, and she is always reminding me how Christ is working in my life. My husband Logan is the most positive person I have ever met, and he is always reminding me to stay positive and to think the best of things and find the best in people. So thank you to Logan and Carissa for helping me on my journey. So now that you have all heard my story, I am excited to become baptized and share with you all that I love Jesus and He is my Lord and Savior.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.